All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. We're about to get started, but I see that there's a few people still joining us. And while you're waiting for the next few moments, if you could give yourself a chance to get familiar with the chat box, it's in the control panel in the lower part of your screen. And we'd love to hear which organization you're tuning in from and also your familiarity with the Earned Income Tax Credit. So if you could enter your familiarity on a scale of 1 to 10, that'd be great. Thanks for everyone who's submitting their chats. Looks like we have some WFN members and some folks from the EITC Funders Network community. Welcome, everyone. So in about 15 seconds, I'm going to start the webinar. Okay, again, welcome everyone. Hello, good morning to everyone on the West Coast, and good afternoon to everyone in the other time zones. Women's Funding Network is thrilled to be partnering with the Earned Income Tax Credit Funders Network, the EITC Funders Network, to bring you this webinar about breaking the cycle of poverty with using the EITC. So not only do we have experts from the EITC Funders Network, but we also have Jennifer Lockwood-Shabbat, President and CEO of the Washington Area Women's Foundation, and Amy Matsui, the Senior Counsel and Director of Government Relations of the National Women's Law Center as well. So before we dive in, I just want to cover a couple pieces of housekeeping. We'll start with some introductions, followed by Amy Matsui speaking about the ways in which tax credits boost economic security for women and their families. You'll have a chance to ask questions once Amy's finished, at which point we'll hand the mic over to Jennifer Lockwood-Shabbat. She'll share her firsthand experience of a women's fund successfully incorporating the EITC and refundable tax credits into their funding strategies. Following Jennifer's portion of this presentation, we'll do another round of live Q&A, which will be followed by time for discussion amongst attendees and the speakers. So there will be plenty of chances for dialogue. Please note that you'll be muted throughout the presentation, just so we can avoid interruptions from background noise. However, we encourage you to submit any questions as they pop into your mind. So while you're listening to the presentation, simply submit the question or comment that you have into the same box that you submitted your organization and familiarity with EITC. So you're well versed in it now. And if during the Q&A sessions you prefer to ask your question verbally, there's a little hand icon alert me that you have a question, and I'll be able to unmute you so that you can share your question directly with the audience and the speakers. And it'd be great if you could provide a little a little intro to yourself, just sharing your organization or company that you're associated with, and that will be helpful to our speakers by providing a little bit of context so they can best cater their response to you and your work. Last but not least, we're recording today's webinar, and we'll share that recording via email. That will go out later this week, and it will be on our website in the webinar library as well. That's womensfundingnetwork.org, and you can share that link with anyone who might be interested in listening. So let's get started. I'll just start by providing a little introduction to the Women's Funding Network for those of you who might not be as familiar. Let's start. What is the Women's Funding Network? With over 100 members, WFN is the largest philanthropic network in the world devoted to women and girls. Our members are made up of women's funds and foundations, family foundations, and some individual members. And our members have access to research and tools that help them grow their work effectively and take collective action. And our biggest goal is to support and advance our members' work by sparking connections, delivering effective communication pieces and research, and creating opportunities, we hope, in person, more so in the future. We've had a great summit this year in March in New Orleans and another one coming up in New York, but creating opportunities to collaborate. So if you're interested in learning more about us or learning more about specific events that are coming up, webinars, or opportunities to join the network, please get in touch with me and we can chat further. My contact information will be at the end of this webinar. So with that, I will hand it over to Amy Nagel.
Hi, thank you so much, and it's a delight to be on with you all this afternoon. My name is Amy Nagel, and I am coordinator of the EITC Funders Network. We are so happy to be co-sponsoring this webinar today with the Women's Funding Network. This has been on my to-do list for quite some time, as we know that women's foundations play just such a critical role in communities with an increasing focus on economic security. And so to bring these two networks together was a hope of mine, and so I'm glad that we're all here together today. Let me just say a word or two about the EITC Funders Network. We are an informal association of charitable foundations who all focus in on the earned income tax credit. We were founded back in 2004 when a mere 20 or so gathered around a table when they realized that they were all doing a little bit of work related to the earned income tax credit. And didn't really have a space to come together to learn about the strategies that each of them are using and what was happening in the field, and how they might use their role as grant makers to really advance the work of the field. So fast forward to 2016, we now have almost 300 members where we have representation nearly nationwide. And the goals really continue to be the same, to help this really large network of charitable foundations and philanthropic advisors to really understand what's happening with the earned income tax credit, sort of explore issues confronting this field, and really grow this very powerful policy intervention. Our scope has changed some over the years, in addition to the sort of bread and butter of tax credit work that is helping people learn about it and get it in free and low-cost settings. Many of our charitable foundation members also focus in on the links between the earned income tax credit and other public benefits like food stamps or subsidized child care. They look at the EITC as a bridge to other financial empowerment, including savings, and a growing number are focused on policy, either at the federal level or at the state level. Like a lot of associations, just like our sister affinity group, we have at WFN, we have meetings and webinars, we have a quarterly e-newsletter. So I just want to invite you to please do visit our website at eitcfunders.org, and we welcome you to join us, the EITC Funders Network. Our membership bar is that if you're a charitable foundation, a philanthropic advisor, and you raise your hand with interest to be part of the network, we would like to welcome you in. So please do reach out if this is of interest. So that's just a little snippet overview about who we are and what we do. I think I will with no further ado, sort of turn it over to Amy Matsui, who's the Senior Counsel and Director of Government Relations at the National Women's Law Center. When we sat down to plan how best to do this webinar, it occurred to us that we really wanted a leading voice in what we know about tax credits and what we know about women and families. And the National Women's Law Center rose, of course, to the top of the list of holding both of those areas of expertise. You will hear a little bit about the National Women's Law Center here in a minute, but let me just flag for you the incredible number of resources they have available in terms of understanding how families think about the earned income tax credit and other tax credits, and tools that you and your grantees can use to really shape campaigns, shape your outreach work, and sort of take that materials and run with it. So I am thrilled to have Amy with us, and what part of her task, or what we have tasked her with, is really to help provide a little bit of an overview for those of you who are new to the earned income tax credit and the other tax credits. Just what are these things, and how do they work, and why are they so important? And how does this relate to women and families? And then a little bit of a preview of sort of some of the policy things that have been underway and some of the work that's left to come. So Amy, I will hand it to you.
Thank you so much, Amy, for that incredibly generous introduction. And I am just delighted to be participating in this webinar today on an issue which we think in our mind is of critical importance to women and has always been, and for a very long time, a key focus of our economic security work. So as Amy alluded to, the National Women's Law Center is a nonprofit located in Washington, D.C. We focus on policies that impact increasing opportunity for women and girls across a broad range of issues, but we have a particular focus on women and low-income women and their families. And as a result, the tax credits, including the EITC, are a very important focus of the work that we do, both on the tax credits outreach side and also on the policy side, as I'll talk about a little bit later. Next slide, please. So the key message here for us is that the EITC and other refundable tax credits boost the economic security of women and their families. It's a linchpin of low-income families' economic security. As you know, the EITC is a federal tax credit that's designed to help boost the income of low-income working families. And if you think about who those families are, especially single parents, the impact of the EITC on women and their children is clear. Millions of women receive the EITC every year, and it changes their families' balance sheets on just the most concrete level imaginable. So one example, striking example of the impact of the EITC is that in 2014, it lifted 1.6 million women and over 3 million children above the poverty line. That is more impactful than any other anti-poverty program that we know of. And in addition, we know that the EITC's refundable benefits, along with other credits like the child tax credit, in addition to having that direct impact on families' budgets, they have long-term positive impacts on women and their families in a range of different areas. The incredible thing about the EITC is that there's a tremendous body of scholarship and research that demonstrates this impact. It covers single mothers' employment. As many of you are well aware, research showed that the increases to the EITC in the late 1990s proved to be a more effective work incentive for single mothers than any of the components of welfare reform. In addition, researchers have found a two-generation impact on the employment and earnings for children who are in families who receive increases in income like those that derive from the EITC and the child tax credit. In addition, increases in the EITC have been demonstrated to provide health benefits, including reduced stress, not surprisingly, for mothers, and that mothers who received bigger increases in the EITC in the late 90s also were more likely to get prenatal care. In addition, there are benefits to children's health, including better health indicators for infants and lower likelihood of poor health for children, which then has a later impact on earnings and employment. And then finally, one of the most significant outcomes of the EITC is on children's education. Both the EITC directly and increases to income in which the EITC are included have demonstrated impacts which result in higher test scores, higher high school graduation rates, and levels of college enrollment and attendance for children. And other positive educational incomes are connected to these boosts in income as well that derive from refundable tax credits. And then the last bullet on this slide focuses on another federal tax credit, which is not the EITC or the child tax credit, and we'll talk a little bit about it in a minute. But I just wanted to briefly mention that one tax credit which also has a significant impact on women is the federal child and dependent care tax credit. So this is a credit which is intended to help families meet the costs of child care in order for the adults in the family to be able to work. And just because of women's role as primary caregivers, child care is a significant barrier to women's employment, and so this is a tax benefit which has a significant impact on women as well. Next slide, please. So I wanted to, as requested, go over a little bit of the nuts and bolts of the Earned Income Tax Credit. So the function of the Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC, is mainly as a wage supplement. It boosts the income and for low and moderate income families. As a tax credit, its initial function is to wipe away tax liability, but because so many of the families that claim the EITC don't have significant or any tax liability, because the EIT is a refundable credit, once their tax liability is reduced to zero, they can receive the rest of their EITC as a refund returned to them by the IRS. And this is really kind of the crux of the impact on families. In general, the EITC's value depends upon a family's income and the number of children in the family who can be claimed under the criteria of the credit. The maximum for tax year 2016 that eligible families can receive is over $6,000. So this is the maximum for a family with a married couple and 3 or more children, and obviously that's a very significant amount. The amounts are somewhat smaller, about $5,500 for families with 2 qualifying children, about $3,300 for families with 1 qualifying child, and then there is an EITC which is available for low-income tax filers without qualifying children, but it's a very, very small credit. In 2016, it's only worth a maximum of $506, and the income limits are extremely low. It's about just over $14,000, very close to the poverty line for a single filer. Next slide, please. So the next slide goes through an example. We really wanted to show kind of our view of what the EITC can do in a family's life, along with other refundable credits like the child tax credit. So we have the example of Jessica, who's a single mother with 3 children. She works at minimum wage full-time in a child care center, so she earns about a little over $14,000 per year. So in 2016, she would be eligible for the maximum EITC, so an EITC worth over $6,200. She also would be eligible for the refundable portion of the child tax credit of about $1,700. Depending on where she lives, she might also be eligible for state tax credits which are based on the EITC or other of these federal family tax credits. So I will note that for these different credits that we'll be talking about a little bit on the next slides, all of them have different requirements and criteria and require different forms. So, this slide mentions that Jessica at her level of income would be eligible for free tax preparation assistance through the VITA program in a community-based tax preparation program And it's a really critical assistance for her because it can help her navigate a very complicated tax form, which enables her to get these valuable benefits that help her make ends meet. And in addition, as I know Jennifer is going to talk about in her portion of the presentation, VITA programs can offer connections to other benefits like SNAP or even enrolling in health insurance, and can help with financial services, opening a bank account, financial education, and present other asset building opportunities that families can deeply benefit from. So the next bullet on this slide talks about how Jessica can use her over $8,000 refund. We have pretty good evidence about how families use their EITC and other tax refunds. Generally, not surprisingly, they tend to spend a good portion of the refund or all of it. Just kind of a concrete example of this is that you probably have seen car dealerships that have a tax preparation service on site during tax season, even though this is not the best example because the tax preparation services, as you can imagine, are often not entirely beneficial for low-income families. But this is a time when families have access to several $1,000s at one go, and they may use it for sizable purchases that may be difficult for them to manage otherwise, like a car. We've heard from folks in our community partner network and childcare networks that families use their refunds to pay bills, to get caught up on rent, repair cars, and buy necessities like clothes or furniture. In addition to helping families pay the bills and stay healthy, we've also heard that families use their refund to catch up on medical procedures that may not be covered by insurance, or dental care, because often dental care is not covered by medical insurance. And so we often see that families are timing their expenditures, use of medical care around the tax season, because they know and are dependent and expect to be getting refunds like these. So the EITC really helps families float and make make their lives connect and survive. And because families are tending to spend their refunds, the EITC has the added benefit of boosting local economies. But I will also add that even though the tax season is something that families, plan around and use to kind of keep their enterprise going, families can't always plan when a car breaks down or they have a repair or someone gets sick. And so one of the things that I want to just touch on is that there are ongoing efforts focused on trying to help tax filers use their refund to create a financial cushion of savings that will help them weather economic shocks throughout the year, and that's also something that VITA sites and other nonprofits are engaged in doing. Next slide, please. So in addition to the EITC, which is obviously a significant credit with a lot of public awareness, a lot of people, because of the size of the EITC, know and kind of focus advocacy around that particular credit. In addition, because the child tax credit, which is worth up to $1,000 per child and really is just targeted at helping families with the expenses of raising children, and is worth up to $1,000 per child. The child tax credit is also partially refundable, and that also makes it kind of a linchpin of tax credit outreach. For families with at least $3,000 in income, the child tax credit is partially refundable. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the federal child independent care tax credit, it helps families meet the cost of paid child care that's needed to work or look for work, and this can be child care that is in a child care center, in a family daycare home, is provided by a family, friend, or a neighbor, or a babysitter in home. It can also include co-pays for families that receive child care assistance, and even day camp for children who are not in school. Unfortunately, although the credit is structured to be most valuable for lower income families, Because it is non-refundable, unlike the EITC and the child tax credit, families who have income of under $20,000 receive virtually no benefit from this credit, unfortunately. I also wanted to point to the federal premium tax credit, which is intended to help families with the cost of health insurance. So under the Affordable Care Act, families who enroll in health care through the marketplaces and are under 400% of poverty are eligible for financial assistance through the premium tax credit. This is structured as an advance credit so that payments go directly to insurers and lift the burden of those monthly payments largely off of families' shoulders. And then at tax time, the advance payments and the eligible payments are reconciled through the federal tax return. So the premium tax credit is also one that low-income families are relying on heavily at tax time. And then finally, I wanted to point to a number of state-based family tax credits. These are credits that go against state tax liability, but a number of states have decided to offer tax assistance to families through their own version of earned income tax credits, child and dependent care tax credits, and also child tax credits. Next slide, please. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes to describe the work that the National Women's Law Center does around these tax credits. As you can see, the impact on women is clear, and the assistance that it provides in low-income families' everyday lives is evident. So the work that we do around the family tax credit has two major components, and the first is tax credits outreach. We are deeply invested in making sure that eligible women and their families access the tax credits that can provide them help in making ends meet. So we have a long-time priority on tax credit outreach. We have worked in coalition with the National EITC Outreach Campaign through the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities and with the Taxpayer Opportunity Network. This allows us to connect our networks with direct service providers on the ground and to also reach a broader audience with materials and educational efforts that we do, like webinars. These connections also allow us to join in advocacy efforts around VITA or more general IRS funding and other issues which touch on access to tax credits. So I wanted to just kind of cover some of the activities that we do around tax credit outreach. One of them are that we provide state-specific outreach materials. Because obviously the EITC has a huge economic impact for women, along with the child tax credit because they're refundable, but we also see the child care tax credit as having significant importance for women on the state and federal level. And so we do flyers for state which list out the federal tax credits as well as the state tax credits, EITC child tax credit, any child and dependent care tax provisions, and their maximum amounts, so families have a sense of what they may be eligible for. We provide these materials in English and Spanish, and several states and federal flyers we offer in Mandarin Chinese and Vietnamese as well. So we make these available to our networks and kind of publicly available on our website so that they can get the broadest access as possible. We also focus on premium tax credit related outreach because one of the largest groups of the uninsured prior to the Affordable Care Act were women and especially young families. And so we worked hard to develop materials to let families know about how much assistance they could get from the premium tax credit, how it works and what the process looks like, and then also how important it is for families to update their information with the marketplace so that their premium tax credit is accurately calculated and so that the reconciliation that happens at tax time is less of a shock or an adjustment. The core networks that we serve, we basically started around our child care advocacy networks. So if you think about it, this is the most direct connection to families with children and the kinds of expenses that families face that can be met by these credits is obviously information which is of significant importance to them. And the child care providers and advocacy groups that see these families every day and are trusted sources of information, sometimes even performing tax credit preparation themselves, were a trusted source of information that got the materials directly to families. So we kind of start there with one of our core constituencies. We also have developed a network of community partners, which are direct service organizations who have come to us for our materials and webinars and other information, and we keep in touch with them through monthly emails, provide information, and then that's a great source of the stories where we can hear about how families are using their refunds and how different policies can impact those families and what's most beneficial for them. So in addition, the last kind of network that I'll touch on is that the Law Center has focused on a couple of very vulnerable populations with a significant gender focus. So for example, we've worked with organizations that serve survivors of domestic violence because tax credits can be just an incredibly important economic boost for women and with their children who are leaving an abusive situation and they need to establish economic independence where they previously didn't have those resources. And so we do webinars and materials and tax questions for domestic violence advocacy organizations every year and have targeted materials and resources for them. Similarly, immigrant families, we work with the National Immigration Law Center to develop materials and advocacy focused on immigrant families because this is obviously another very vulnerable population with a significant gender perspective. Next slide, please. This is a very quick overview of the different tax credits that I've run through at incredible speed, unfortunately, and so I hope this is a resource that's helpful for you as you think about the work focused on the EITC, but folding in the other tax credits as well. Next slide, please. I did want to, as Amy mentioned, cover a number of aspects of tax credit policy that we're focused on. We are deeply invested in making tax benefits as robust as possible for women and their families. And in turn, in the world of tax policy, we see our role as elevating women's voice and the impact of women for different policy proposals, particularly in a time of stagnant funding for programs and for benefits. Tax credits, especially in recent years, have been an incredibly important area of focus for us. We are involved in broader tax and budget coalitions, including Americans for Tax Fairness and the Coalition on Human Needs, and there are a couple of very current areas of tax policies that I briefly wanted to touch on. So the first point, improvements to the EITC and child tax credit that were made in 2009 as part of the economic recovery package. And there were improvements made to the EITC, for example, making it more valuable for families with 3 or more children, and for the child tax credit, lowering the amount of earned income that families needed to have in order to get a refund. So both of these improvements were critical for families' economic security, and it was only in December 2015 that they were made permanent. So our role in these ongoing debates that ran over a 6-year period were both to point out that because women rely so heavily on the EITC and child tax credit, women would have suffered 2/3 of the losses if these improvements had not been made permanent, which fortunately they were. At the same time, we also pointed to tax cuts that for higher income families or for corporations that were made permanent during this time while families and hardworking low-income families were waiting for these improvements to be made permanent. The next policy area that I wanted to touch on are what the smaller EITC, which is generally referred to as the childless EITC. So to be more specific, workers who are very low income, making around the poverty level, but cannot claim a qualifying child for the Earned Income Tax Credit, either because they're a non-custodial parent or the child does not live with them, or the child is older than the age range for which they can be claimed for the EITC. So those are all kinds of people, including to those who don't have children, who could claim the EITC. And we are pointing out different proposals such as the Obama budget proposal and proposals that have been introduced by Senator Sherrod Brown and the impact that those have on women. I know I'm running a little bit short on time, so I just want to touch on the last 2 points, which are improvements to the federal child and dependent care tax credit, including making it refundable so that lower income families can benefit from it, and then work around state tax credits. And the Law Center has worked particularly around child care credits and have been a resource for legislative drafting and policy consulting on the state level for these as well. So I'm going to turn this back over to Amy. I know that we have a slide coming up that has resources on it that I hope that you will visit, and that my contact information is available if you have any questions or want to talk about anything in particular.
Great. Thank you, Amy. That was a tremendous overview in a very short period of time. Covered a lot of territory, and I think really gave us a sense of just how important these credits are to low-income families, in particular female-headed families. And on your very last slide, just what those expansions really meant to just millions of women across the country. So thank you for touching on that at the end. I'll just note also for the audience that on the EITC Funders Network website, we have already uploaded the fact sheet that Amy very briefly spoke to, as well as a couple of the other resources. So you can get them directly here, which is why I'm lingering here on the resources page, as well as they'll be up on our website as well. Great. We have made it to our first Q&A break. We have a couple minutes here. We certainly didn't want to breeze right on through without taking a few questions from the audience. So as you heard earlier, the 2 ways that you can ask questions include typing in the chat box or in the questions box, and you can raise your hand via the raise the hand button, and we will call on you. I don't see any questions coming in yet, so I will maybe just jump in with a first one. I'll also invite my colleagues to be thinking about it. So Amy, one of the things that you touched on, and I really very briefly touched on, was this idea or this notion of how families get the earned income tax credit. They get it during tax time. And you and the example that you provided about Jessica alluded to what can be seen in many neighborhoods and really sadly, unfortunately, in a lot of low-income neighborhoods where taxpayers are particularly advertised to come spend your refund check here. And it occurred to me that might be helpful to kind of linger a little bit longer on this point about just what is the what's the problem there in the sense of how families are getting their earned income tax credit and the other tax credits, why tax time is so important, and the what happens in terms of sort of predatory activity when families aren't going to the VITA sites, the free and the low-cost tax sites, and they're going to other kinds of sites. I don't know if you want to say a word or two more about that.
Sure, and I'm sure also Jennifer probably can jump in with this a little bit. So one of the important things for families, as I mentioned, I mentioned VITA sites briefly, which are nonprofits with IRS-trained representatives. And the great things about VITA sites are not only that they're free, so that families generally don't have to pay much, if anything, of a fee and cut into their refund, but they're also available. So if an issue arises or there is a question with the IRS, families have a resource that can help them resolve those questions. Whereas if there is a neighborhood tax preparation site, or as I mentioned, a site that's next to a car dealership, first of all, their priority is getting the biggest refund possible, and that really opens itself up to errors, and most of the mistakes and fraud around the EITC are committed by paid tax preparers and not through VITA sites. And once the tax filer has this kind of communication back from the IRS that there's a problem with tax return, they don't have a resource to go to, because those many of those tax preparation services will close up after the tax season. So it's a question of accuracy, it's a question of not having fees, and it's a question of just having access to resources after the fact if there's an issue with the tax return.
Great, that's super helpful. Let's take at least one more question before time will force us to move on. We've had a question from the audience asking, how does the EITC fit in with other economic security policy efforts like raising the minimum wage?
That is a really good question, and that's also a piece of our advocacy, because those are really two things that go together. So if you have someone who is working full-time at the minimum wage, they are still hovering around the poverty level. And so the EITC is really something that rewards their full-time work and gives them a boost in their wages. So when you combine these two policies together, raising the minimum wage and the EITC are complementary strategies that really help increase hardworking families in the low-wage workforce, their economic security, and they work together. And it's important to not think about them as alternatives for raising families' wages. Just thinking about the lives of families and how truly low income is working at the minimum wage, really these are both strategies that are needed and desperately needed so that families can make ends meet.
Terrific. I have an eye on the time, so I think at this juncture we will hold any other questions, although again I want to remind folks you could be asking questions at any time. We'll be gathering up and certainly be able to get to them in our final Q&A portion. But at this time I'd like to go ahead and introduce Jennifer Lockwood-Chabot, President and CEO of the Washington Area Women's Foundation. It's my great pleasure to have Jennifer with us today, a longtime colleague, and certainly many of you well know the Washington Area Women's Foundation has been a real leader among women's foundations and local foundations who have been looking to improve the economic security of local areas and thinking about what's the role of women workers, women as head of households in that calculation and in that mix. I'm especially pleased to have Jennifer on, as she is a member of the EITC Funders Network Steering Committee, and just thrilled to have you on, Jennifer, so I will hand it to you.
Great, thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today and be able to share a little bit about the strategies that we're undertaking here at Washington Area Women's Foundation, and I'm thrilled that I have the opportunity to present from both the WFN perspective as well as the EITC Funders Network by serving on the steering committee. So again, my name is Jennifer Lockwood-Chabot. I'm the President and CEO of Washington Area Women's Foundation. Our mission is to mobilize our community to ensure that economically vulnerable women and girls in the Washington region have the resources they need to thrive. So we are operating in the District of Columbia as well as the close-in suburbs in Virginia and Maryland. We achieve our work through three strategies: grant making, research, and advocacy. But today I'm really going to focus on the grant making strategy around EITC and asset building strategies writ large. In terms of women's foundations, I think what's really unique about the role that we play is the fact that we do bring a gender lens to our work. And it's not only to our work, but it's also about how we influence the work of our partners in the community. And part of that is educating, part of that is challenging, and part of that is really influencing others to think about the very unique challenges that low-income women face. Our flagship grant-making program is called Stepping Stones, and we launched that back in 2005. We launched the program after we did a fairly robust piece of research that looked at the needs of women and girls across our community. And that research really identified a couple of key drivers in poverty locally for women, and also really helped us hone in on focusing on increasing the economic security of low-income women and girls throughout the region. That originally had a very strong focus on single female-headed households, and we have more recently expanded to include women living under 200% of the poverty level. The key drivers that are part of the strategy of Stepping Stones are workforce development, so jobs with family-sustaining wages, early care and education, access to high-quality child care. And then the third is asset building. We have long recognized since the beginning of Stepping Stones that asset building, financial education, financial capability, and tax preparation and tax credits was a key strategy to increasing the economic security for women and girls. To date, we have invested nearly $9 million in the community through our grants. That's helped over 16,000 women increase their income and assets by more than $53 million. We get at that calculation of the $53 million really by tracking higher wages, decreased debt, increased income as a result of tax credits, increases in savings, and growing equity that's related to home ownership. So next slide, please. To talk a little bit more deeply about the impacts specifically related to EITC and asset building, as you can see here on this slide, in the last 3 years alone, nearly $6 million of the increase in income and assets is attributed specifically to the Earned Income Tax Credit. And that was actually nearly half of the total increase in income and assets that women built over those 3 years. So you can see that it's a significant part of our asset building strategy and provides, for lack of a better term, a significant ROI and a big bang for your buck as you're thinking about a funding strategy. For us, capturing the impact of our EITC-related work was really critical. So we work hand in hand with our grantee partners. We have a small evaluation work group where they really help us think through the quantitative measures that we're going to be tracking. And that includes things like the number of people accessing EITC, the total amount of refunds received, decreases in debt, increases in savings, tax preparation cost saved, as Amy mentioned just a minute ago, in terms of being able to have your taxes prepared at a site that does that for free versus incurring some pretty substantive costs if you do it elsewhere. And we're also tracking changes in knowledge related to financial literacy. I think as a funding strategy, what I want to say is that EITC is an incredibly persuasive strategy that really yields an incredible return on investment. EITC it's a benefit that already exists and people currently qualify for. So as Amy mentioned just a minute ago, there are certainly a number of policies that could be in place to further strengthen EITC and other tax credits. But even in its current iteration, it can really provide tremendous benefit to women and their families. And many times it's just a matter of supporting providers to connect with families in both the short term and the long term. So it's really about thinking about the education and the outreach components that go side by side with actually providing the tax services. In terms of the grant-making strategies that we have pursued over time, we have invested in a variety of asset-building strategies, with EITC being a fairly significant strategy within that. I would say since about 2005, we have been supporting free tax preparation sites in the District of Columbia. We've done that through one organization in particular, Community Tax Aid. We've also supported our local, the DC EITC campaign, which really works to do increased education and outreach. In the District of Columbia, about 18% of households that filed their taxes received the EITC with an average benefit of just over $2,300. At the same time, over 70% of eligible households that file their taxes access this benefit. So there's still some room in terms of the education and outreach and bumping up that number. We do look at tax time as a time in which we can think about additional interventions that can take place. And we're also thinking about how we can build out other points of engagement around goal setting and asset building. One example is several years ago, we funded some pilot work here locally to do some co-enrollment and enroll people in SNAP benefits at the same time that they were receiving the free tax prep services and filing their taxes. We're also looking at blended services, which really thinking about how do you combine asset building opportunities and workforce development services at the same time in the same location. And EIT is a great example of one activity that can bridge those two moments in time. This year we are funding a partnership actually between an asset building grantee, capital area asset builders, to work on site with an adult education program called Academy of Hope. And essentially, CAB is providing a set of services to adult students and alumni who are moving through the adult basic education program. And those set of services include financial education, financial coaching, and then as a part of the menu services, free tax prep and earned income tax credit is a part of that. And it's being provided on site while they're moving through their work as adult learners and possibly pursuing post-secondary education and careers. It's important to note that I think our grant making really encourages a long-term engagement with families and holistic services. Over the last couple of years, we have worked to streamline our RFP that we issue to the community so that organizations can essentially blend different program strategies and that they can also do that through their evaluation. And I think that that's just an interesting and a sort of an easy strategy for funders to think through in terms of how you issue your call for proposals and your RFPs to encourage others to think about blending strategies. Next slide, please. So finally, I wanted to say a couple of words about the two-generation impact. And I'm not going to go over everything that's on this slide because Amy touched on it in her presentation in terms of the data and the research that has been done demonstrating that EITC really is a two-generation approach and a two-generation benefit. But I wanted to point this out specifically because I know for those women's foundations who are on the phone and participating in this webinar, I know that WFN and other women's foundations across the country are interested in looking at two-generation strategies and how you incorporate that into your work, whether it's one specific program or whether it's across your entire grant-making portfolio. And I think the EITC and investing in free tax prep services is a really easy way to get at a two-generation approach. If this is new to your work and new to your portfolio, there's a lot of tremendous research out there that talks about the impact for both mothers and their children. Listed a couple of here. The EITC Funders Network also released a paper, which I believe we'll be sharing with all of you, that shares additional research about this as well. So I think that I will close there. The final slide, if you want to learn more about our work, please feel free to visit our website. We also work really diligently to provide research about what's happening here locally in our community, and we recently released a new 5-year strategic plan that includes launching advocacy work in this space. And so we will be moving toward connecting what we're learning from the direct service work that's happening on the ground and how we connect that into the advocacy work as well. So I think I will close there and take any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. So as Jennifer said, we are now in open question mode, so please start a dialogue or share your questions in the chat box if you'd like to ask one. Looks like we do have one from, please let me know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but Jamie at the Women's Foundation of California. Jamie is a program officer, and the question is, you talked about trusted organizations that you work with providing these services to families. What's the process for training program staff and understanding this in how to support their clients? Is it burdensome to add this for program staff to implement? And I think this was actually for Amy Matsui.
So I will take a stab at it, and then I'll be happy to turn it over to Jennifer. I mean, we work really closely with other policy organizations. So our direct service partners that we provide information for, we can connect them up with other, tax preparation networks or organizations who are involved on the ground through our connections to the National EITC outreach campaign and through National Community Tax Coalition folks. So it really is a matter of, making connections, giving people the information that they need, and just making it easier for them to help families in a way of providing information and connections as much as possible. I mean, we have done, outreach through direct grants to our partner organizations, and there it's just, it is a close relationship, but it's very tied to the kinds of work that we're doing anyway in, making the materials and tailoring them and just giving folks what they need.
Thank you. Are there other questions coming in?
So this is Amy Nagel. I would maybe jump in with a question for Jennifer around, I think some folks might find it interesting about how you talk with your board about this. It's a different kind of arena. Taxes are sort of a different kind of arena than other kind of services. And I just wondered, I was just curious to see, was this a different kind of conversation with your board? Is it something they have a hard time getting their hands around? Just sort of that internal dialogue that you all had to have to get into this space.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Interestingly, no, it was not a difficult dialogue with our board. And part of that came about as a result of really the research that we did that identified the levers and the strategies that we needed to be engaging in. And I think our board is very well informed around the strategies that can move the needle on economic security for women and girls. And so, the thing that I think is so interesting and unique really about EITC is that there is a wealth of research and documentation that really backs up just how important EITC is to low-income working families. And so, presenting that data and having some additional data about what it would look like here in DC and what it would mean for women locally, it ended up really being very much a no-brainer.
So I'm just going to invite Kalitha Williams from Policy Matters Ohio. If you're still on, Kalitha, would you mind sharing that comment that you had about EITC, the options in other states? I'll unmute you, and if you're still on, you can share that. Kalitha, are you on? All right, it looks like we're having some issues with the mic there. I just want to give another 60 to 90 seconds for questions if anyone has any.
So a question's come into the question box. I don't know whether you're able to see it.
Yeah, I'm. Oh, it looks like one from Grace Lewis. I'm seeing this now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jennifer, could you reiterate the evaluation points that you use?
Yes, in terms of the indicators. So for this work, we look at the number of people accessing the Earned Income Tax Credit, the total amount of refunds received, decreased debt, increased savings, tax preparation cost saved, and changes in knowledge related to financial literacy. And hopefully I went slow enough for you to capture that. And I'm happy to follow up with any additional questions and metrics and how we arrived at those.
You're welcome, Grace. Thank you for asking the question. So that's just wanted to give Cletha one more chance to see if her mic is working, but still doesn't seem to be working. So please, for any follow-up, please email Amy, Nagel, or I, and we will direct your questions to the appropriate person. But I wanted to thank all of you for joining us today, and thank the speakers for taking the time to share their expertise and engaging in really great dialogue. So when you sign off today, you'll be invited to take a really quick poll, about 5 questions about this webinar, and we encourage you to submit your feedback because it helps us determine which experts to bring in for you and for you to learn more via webinars. So thank you again. We'll be posting this soon on our website. You'll receive a recording and a follow-up email. And our next webinar is on May 11th, if you'd like to tune in. We're hosting a $1 million donor who will provide a really candid inside scoop about what you should or should not be doing to engage and cultivate major donors. So please reach out to me if you have any questions or interest in that. And we look forward to collaborating soon.
Thank you.